Welcome back to Anything Outdoors with Steve. Today we're doing a strut replacement on the old Mitsubishi Eclipse. This is a 2003 model, and if you want to see front to end on how to do a replacement on this thing, we will show you all the way through, including what to do if you've got a strut that's seized on the mount. So if you are interested in just that portion, skip to the second half of the video and you'll get to see how I solved that issue. If you like what you see, you find this helpful, be sure to give us a thumbs up. All right, let's see if we've got all the right parts here. Always hope for the best. You never know what you get. Let's see. Looks like we have the rest of the parts. Yesterday they sent one front strut and that was it. So that's all I replaced yesterday. Today they've got the rest. And this is what you get in the box. There we go. One strut. Get some destructions that go in the garbage. And there's the top nut. And a washer. Okay, so the washer, top nut. These are one-time use, they're nylocks. So once you tighten it down, that's it. You got to replace it afterwards. And these are very tight, so I have to get a wrench on it just to raise it up some. If you walk this back and forth, the shaft back and forth, it'll actually start popping out slowly. Of course, I already mentioned that yes, the reason your tire is hopping is because it is off balance. No matter what, it's never going to be perfectly balanced. Now the struts are there to take up the rest of that impact, and that way you don't feel it in your steering wheel. When you start to feel it, typically it's the struts, especially when you've got 140,000 miles on them. Now there are times you can toss your wheel weights. When that happens, you've got the same shaking and shimmying in the steering wheel, and that is of course often noticed when you see a nice clean spot on your rim where the wheel weight had been tossed off. There's also the sticky backs that they put on the inside of the rim as well to help balance both inside and outside. Those you can't of course see except for remaining tape residue that's left behind. Keep in mind, I am no longer a professional mechanic. I used to be, so now I just play one on TV. Take this all with a grain of salt. Of course, I'm wearing my kitten mittens because it's bad enough I have to work on this damn thing for a few hours. I don't want to spend a couple more hours cleaning my hands. So I'm donning the gloves. I'm going to show you just one side, front and rear, so you have a basic idea of how to do this. If you want to do it yourself, you can. I bought struts without the springs. You can get them pre-loaded and compressed with straps that you just cut when you're done, and it'll pop the spring back out. It costs about $50 a piece more, roughly, depending on the brand of strut that you've got, of course. These are Monroe struts. Not that I'm saying Monroe are any good or not. I just bought them because that's what I had available to me. So these have nothing else other than the strut itself. So you have to get the rubber base seal on here, all your dampers, everything else on here yourself. You have to compress your own spring, put the old spring back on. The chances of your spring being worn out are pretty slim. Now, of course, you always want to think about your safety equipment. So if you're getting underneath your vehicle for any reason, you always want to use jack stands so that way you can safely get underneath there. If your jack is to fail, the jack stands hold your vehicle. I'm not getting underneath, so I am just jacking it up. If it falls, and it breaks additional stuff that I get to fix later. Just enough to get the tire off the ground. Now I got one of these battery operated impact. I used to do solely the air tanks. I'd have to drag out the air tank. I've got a larger one that every time I use it, it pops the breaker. I got this thing and I always wondered why I didn't get one earlier, other than they make them so much better quality now than what they used to be. So I'm glad I did wait. So had I got one earlier, it probably would have been a cheaper version. You can now get them brushless motors, all kinds of good stuff that will last a long time. And so far it's been doing really well. And of course, this is a foreign car, so all metric sockets have to be dug out. So here we go with metrics. Yay. For some reason on this car, it doesn't seem to matter what I do. It doesn't matter what I grease it with. I've got anti-seize lubricant back there. It doesn't matter. This rim always seizes on, so I have to use the trusty mallet. Give it a good whack until it breaks loose. Luckily, it hasn't been on there very long, so it came right off with a couple whacks. Other than that, I have to get a pry bar in there. I've got a good 3-foot long pry bar that I use to pop it loose when it doesn't want to play nice. So with the wheel off, you can get to see all the goodness in here. And it's time for some new rotors. Not too worried about it. Brakes are good. It stops easy. This specific one has a little 7mm end on it. So you give it a little twist and she starts raising up. Doesn't matter which direction. The reason you want this fully extended is when you compress the spring, you can actually get the end nut on without having to fight and battle it. Next up, I'm gonna pop the hood right now that my hands are still kind of clean. Get that taken care of. With the hood popped, you can see the top of the strut tower here. I'm gonna go ahead and mark the position for the front. You don't have to do too much, just a little mark in the dirt, so that way you know which way's front. These are indexed, so that way you can't put it on backwards. The top does spin freely. It wants to tilt that strut outward, so that way it's properly placed, but you cannot do it any other way than this. But this just keeps you from guessing and checking while you're holding that strut up. The only thing you need to remove are the 2 large bolts here, the brake line bolt here, and this anti-sway bar nut here. First, I believe this is 24mm. Yes, it is. I always loosen the nut side instead of the bolt side. The nut comes off a lot easier than the bolt. If you try to take the bolt off, the nut tends to spin every single time. It'll still do that this way, but it's less likely to do so. You can get a little more distance with it this way. Don't hold on to it with your fingers. You will regret it. And anything in there to hold that from spinning. I'm using the wrong size wrench, but it'll hold it from spinning. There we go. One down. And next one. Try not to breathe in that dust. And those will hammer right out. And as soon as you take this bottom one off, this is going to want to set down. Gave it some support. There we go. It's going to drop free. This allows this strut to turn. You can get easier access to this bolt here. And if I recall, it was a 12mm. Nope. Oh, that was 13. That's why. This is 12. This comes out pretty easy. When you're putting that back together, do not over torque it. You will strip it out easy. And now for the sway bar. So the issue with this is you want to put your finger back here, even though I told you not to do it with these. It's a round disc back here. You want to loosen this slowly, and as soon as it starts spinning back here, you want to stop spinning it. So that should be a 14mm. So I've got my finger back there. So nice and slow. Yep, there it goes. For this last little bit, I'm gonna grab a 14mm wrench and an Allen. Now you can just slowly back this nut off. This anti-sway bar is under tension. You do have to fight this out a little bit by pushing down on your sway bar. That's where having a pry bar comes in handy, because you can put some tension down on this guy here, and just enough to get this guy out. There we go. You just have to get enough tension on it where it pops it out. Our last bit is the strut tower here. So you've got the same 14mm. And as soon as you take this last one out, it's going to drop the whole strut tower, so you have to get some hand on it, so that way it doesn't just drop to the ground. There we go. Drop this out. And as you can see, that top plate just spins. That's why I marked which way was the front, so I can just look at it, say, okay, here's my mark, that goes up front, slip her up in, and I don't have to fight it anymore. And of course, if you look at the top, these two are closer together. That's your other indicator, but I don't even have to mess with it. So next step is compressing the spring, and that's the fun part. You're gonna want a little bit of working room, because as you can tell, there's not a whole lot of coils to work with here. If you just squeeze these two, it's not enough. It's enough to get the top plate off, but you can't get it back on. So you might as well squeeze all the way as much as you can. So what I do is I get one at the top here. This is your spring compressor. As you tighten this bolt, it brings the top down. This one slides freely on the shaft, of course, but it'll bring this down and slowly compress your spring. So I get it as high up in there as possible. I'll even give it a whack or two. Get it really up in there. That's what she said. Sometimes I'll disassemble this all the way, and that way I can get this guy hammered in there too. There we go. It's a little easier to slide her in that way instead of fighting it. I'll go ahead and use my impact on this just to speed up the process. Try not to hammer it too much, but there we go. Just get her tight. Get the other side on. You want that 180 degrees out from the previous. That should be enough. So now it's the top nut. So this little dust cover comes right off. And I believe that's a 19 millimeter as well. And you want to take this off nice and easy. I already know I don't have much spring compression on here, but there is still some. So it could go pop. There we go. All right, so now you have to kind of pry this, walk it off. I use my little pry bar here to pop it loose. It is indexed for the rod. You can see it's got a little half moon. So does the rod. So you've got to get that lined up when you put it back together. Your bumper, your dust seal, all that comes off. And you're going to reassemble the same way you took it apart. This little bumper here that the spring rides on goes on your new strut. It's got little keepers on it. You can see these little keepers. They look like little bullets. They just slide right into the holes of the new strut. And that gives the spring a little less vibration noise on the highway. Of course, you can see right where it goes. There's a little raised section here, a little raised section there. Real easy to line up. And there you go. You just pull those little bullets through. They lock in place a little bit, not really well, because the steel on this is actually a little bit thicker than the OEM stuff. Go figure. You want to line up your spring so the start of the coil is right on that ramp. There we go. And then you've got to line up this. It's got the same thing. So it's got the coil start right here. It's very obvious where that is. Not so obvious when you're not looking at it from the top. So I take the screwdriver and I mark it. So I know where I'm looking. Just a little mark in the dirt. You don't have to go through the paint or anything crazy. But before you put this on, you got to put your bumper on and dust seal. There we go. I marked the top just in the dirt, so that way I know which way it is. And I can line that up with the top coil here. Right there. Now I've got to index this so it sits in properly. Gotta turn it a little more. You want this as close as possible so you're not battling. There we go. Because you only get one shot at this, really. There it is. So you get the little flat part there. Now you don't have to fight that anymore. And it doesn't matter where this goes, because remember it spins. And we are going to use our new nut wherever I put it. You got to use your new nut because the nylock is blown out on the first one that you just took off. It's 65 foot-pounds for this guy, I believe. I'll double check that before I quote it. And then you put your dust seal back on wherever I may have put that. And then you can put your dust seal back on. Next up, you loosen up your spring compressors without letting that thing flop too far. You can use 19mm wrench. I have a 3/4. It works just fine. And you can loosen it up slowly with the wrench, so that way you can control it. And as you recall, I had to hammer this in, so I got to hammer it back out. There we go. This goes back the same way it came out. I'll do a fast pace, just putting it in there. It gets dark now at 7 o'clock, so the rest of this is going to be with poor lighting. I'll do the best I can with the flashlight on my head. Took about 45 minutes to do this. It's not a whole lot of time involved in it. You do have to have a spring compressor. They're cheap, maybe 40, 50 bucks. The complete units are typically about $60 to $80 a piece more expensive, so you're saving $60 to $80 per strut. It is nice having brand new parts, new bearings, new everything. So if you've got any play at all, you have to replace it anyway. Check all the bearings at the top tower here. If there's any play, like I said, you're gonna have to replace it anyway. So I'm gonna go ahead and slide this in and start reassembling this all. These get about 35 foot-pounds. The challenge is that sway bar, because you have to press that thing back down just to get the sway bar back in. And I can start this with the impact, but I can't spin it all the way. Just until it starts to spin. There we go. Now that this is down and loose, I'm going to make sure the control arm is fine. No worn out bushings, nothing else that I have to worry about. It's really easy to see when it's apart like this. And you can give it a wiggle. If there's any movement or play at all, you have to replace it. Same with your ball joints, your everything. Just look at everything, make sure your CV boots are good. And with everything good, you can go ahead and reassemble it. These get about 120 foot-pounds. Reassembled, ready for the wheel. Make sure everything is tight. Double check everything you took apart. I still have the brake line to put on. That is your 12 millimeter. And like I said, you don't want to over torque it when you're putting it back on. Right there. After you do this a while, you kind of get a feel for what the torques feel like, even with an impact. I'm still going to go over it with a torque wrench, make sure everything's nice and tight. We're going to go ahead and finish up on the rear strut and show you how that one's done, and I'll try to make this as quick and painless as possible. If you do not have an impact wrench, you will want to loosen your lug nuts first. And of course, before I get started, I'm going to get my kitten mittens on, so that way I'm not scrubbing grease off for the next hour. It's not quite worn out enough to where you can see the air, but it's real close. But I'm going to be getting some tires here real soon. We have a 17 millimeter bolt on the back of the strut here. In the car, they're nice enough to give you an access panel. You got two 14 millimeter on the top of the tower here. While you're under here, go ahead and check everything out. Look at all the rubber bushings on the sway arms, all these little ball joints, control arms, everything you're just checking out. I'm gonna go ahead and break these two 14s loose. There's one. Standard protocol is you're supposed to drop one on the ground so you can never find it. I just made it worse. You're gonna need your mallet, your trusty mallet. Give that strut a good whack and it should pop right off. Should. Just a little bit of force on her. Got zero movement so far. This stuff will eat through anything. Bye bye ozone. Let's see if we have any luck now. Breaking this loose. I'm going to give that some impacts. Hopefully it'll maybe break some of this rust loose or the corrosion loose, and it might drive it off. It's not going to work, but I'm going to do it anyway. Having the impact right on that inner sleeve is the best chance you've got. Invariably, it seems like it's always the last one that you do is always going to be like this. All right, let's try this again. We'll see if this works. All right, let's hope for some luck. If this separates the inner sleeve from the outer sleeve, I am kind of hosed. So let's hope for some luck here. Get this on there and start going. There we go. All right, we got a winner. Well, this is a $15 tool and worth every penny right now. It's nice having the right tools. Or just the tools. Alright, so as soon as I break this loose, it's going to want to pop down some. I left the nut at the top so it doesn't come dropping down. Success! There's always got to be one, but I'm kind of glad that happens. That way you can see what it takes to get one that's bound up out of there. This little $15 Harbor Freight tool, that's all it takes. Pitman arm puller. So I'm going to go ahead and compress the spring here. Now that we've got the spring pressure relieved, we can go ahead and loosen up this top nut here. That's the only time you can safely do it. I went ahead and cheated some. I just got some channel locks onto the shaft there because it's going in the garbage anyway. And went ahead and used the impact. And of course it spins, so it chews up the shaft, but it doesn't matter because it's going in the garbage. You want to assemble all the parts the way they're going to go back together so you don't get confused and lose track of which one's which. This little bumper is probably the worst part because it's pressure fit. There we go. At least the bumper's good. Old spring off the old strut and onto the new strut. So you want to line up the spring with the stopper there, and then you can start assembling this all back together. So the bumper goes back on and it stops right there flush with the top of that. Then the boot, gotta have the dust boot. That's what protects the shaft from getting nicks and dirt and debris. And then the rest of this stuff. This has your bearing at the top and rubber isolators, dampers. And then the new nut. So again, these are one-time use nuts. Not that one, this one. One-time use nut. I'm going to go ahead and thread it on, relieve the spring pressure so I'm not fighting the rubber stopper at the top. So once I've got that threaded on, I can start to relieve the spring pressure. And I've got to get this aligned both at the bottom here and at the top. So the top of the spring has to be in this stop right here. So I've got to get those both aligned. So I'm going to go ahead and relieve the spring pressure now and get that set up. Now we have to tighten up this top nut. So 17mm again. Just using my channel locks to grab onto the top little pinch nut there and tighten her down. This gets 45 foot-pounds. I'm going to go ahead and put this guy back in. Thread this back in. And there's the front mark. I'm going to get one tower nut back on just to hold it in place. So with this pushed all the way down, it'll just slip right on and we're good to go. Get a little Loctite on this. This nut gets 65 to 80 foot-pounds of torque. The top tower nuts are 35 foot-pounds of torque. Dust boot goes back on. It's kind of a tight fit to get it in there. And the trim cover back on, and you are ready to put your wheel back together. Keep in mind, every car is different. There are some cars where you have to drop this bolt just to get access and unbolt that top bracket that goes around the strut tower. They've got the strut tower bracket mounted to the body here. This one is mounted all the way up to the top, so you do not have to worry about that. It makes the work a little easier, but this is a taller strut because of that. Makes getting it in and out a little more difficult too. Whenever you're working with your anything on the front end, rear end included, a lot of times you have to go back in and get this thing realigned. So that'll be my next step, is to go in for alignment. I am kind of curious if they're able to check it first to see if it's out of alignment, if they're even willing to do so. A lot of times they just loosen everything up, put it on the rack, and put it back together again once it's aligned. So they don't even bother wasting their time with it. Go ahead and bring her in for an alignment. The alignment feels good, no hands. It wants to pull a little to the right, but that's the crown of the road. You get her back in the ruts, she stays right in there. If you're like me and you want to save a little money, go ahead and buy just the struts themselves. It takes about an extra half hour each one, and it's about a $60 saving each. So you can have $240 extra in your wallet, and it's going to take an extra 2 hours of your time. So it's pretty decent savings there. Not amazing. The labor for anybody else to install them, they're going to charge you an hourly rate. I don't know what the shop rates are anymore because I do a lot of the work myself. But if the shop rate's $100 an hour, they're going to charge you 4 hours flat rate. You're $400 out just in labor. These struts were about $80 a piece for the rear and $100 for the fronts. It wasn't horrible, and it rides nice. I just have to get a few other things taken care of, like the tires being worn. Got to get this thing on the rack for alignment anyway. If you have any questions, I'm willing to answer them. Again, I'm not a professional mechanic anymore. I just play one on TV. So if you like what you've seen, be sure to leave a thumbs up. Remember, your car is going to be slightly different from mine, and the fundamentals of each will be roughly the same, so you will have about the same setup. The details will be minutely different. All right, we're picking up my car after the alignment. They gave me a call saying that since this is a new store, they're doing a drawing every week, and I was the winner of the drawing, so I get a free repair. My repair is the alignment. I get so many telemarketer calls that I didn't think it was real. So this is Mike.
Hello.
And he's got my car ready.
I do. Golden Rule Brake Falls, this as well. All right.
All right.
You are ready to rock and roll. Repairs on the house today.
Yeah, that's what I heard. So there it is, paid $126. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that, and of course, since I get so many telemarketer calls, I say, "Is this real?" Yay! But he's like, "No, it's real." I'm like, "Well, I better do a better reaction video, I guess." But yeah, Mike's hooked me up. They had to bring my car to the valley just to get the repair done because their alignment rack wasn't calibrated yet. So they brought it to the valley shop and had it repaired there, and then brought it back. We're all done, ready to roll. All right, thanks guys.
Yep, thank you. Have a good one.
Yes. This is the new Golden Rule brake in Post Falls. They just opened a couple weeks ago for the grand opening. Still getting things set up. All right, now let's see how well she tracks. The alignment was horrible on it before, and you can see the extreme tire wear since the struts were replaced. I didn't have time to get the alignment done until after the trip. I had to drive several weeks to and from work. They even left a little treat for me. But I'll definitely be back. Brakes, shocks, struts, anything else like that they do here. They did an estimate for me as well for a few other repairs because my rear brake drum has a small leak past the hydraulic piston there. They suggested I get that done as well. Oh yeah, they've got all the numbers pre and post. I'll have to go through this. Thank you for joining.